The information provided on this podcast is not legal advice and is intended for the sole purpose of providing education and legal information. Laws change over time, and the information provided on this podcast may not be up to date. We make no warranty, express or implied, regarding the information provided by our team or our guests on this podcast. The information should not be construed as legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship with us or any of our guests on the podcast. If you would like to consult with an attorney, please call 1-800-VICTIMS. That's 1-800-842-8467 for attorney referral contact information. This podcast provides a platform for the exchange of ideas and information to help educate crime victims on their rights. Some content will include topics and materials that may involve descriptions of violence or assaults which can be distressing to victims and survivors. It may also impact service providers experiencing vicarious trauma. Podcasting from the Victims of Crime Resource Center, this is Season 2 of Knowledge is Power, Victim to Survivor, a podcast series where we help crime victims understand their rights so they can go from victims to survivors. On this episode, we'll discuss the services provided by the Crime Victims Assistance Network with Chris Ward. Welcome in, everyone. It's me once again, your humble host, Nemo Malavi with the Victims of Crime Resource Center. And today it's my pleasure to welcome Chris Ward, the Executive Director of iCAN. That's the Crime Victims Assistance Network. Chris, thank you so much for taking your time and coming on the podcast here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So, Chris, I'd like to start our interview by asking you about iCAN. Could you maybe tell our audience a little bit about iCAN, the organization's history, its goals, its mission?
History of iCAN. iCAN was born out of the idea that we wanted to provide a service to victims of violent crime where they didn't have to worry about whether or not they had reported to the police. Where it doesn't matter whether the crime happened 20 years ago or 20 seconds ago, that was all inclusive, that we could assist all victims of violent crime. And we were seeing some areas where victims were having barriers to accessing services. And so iCAN was created to try to break down those barriers and get services to all victims who have been traumatized by violent crime, whether it is that we bring the services into their community or we provide information about what is available to them in their community. And we wanted to make sure that this was provided completely free of charge, so that they're really, with the only issue being the barriers that we're working on breaking down, that they really didn't have to worry about anything else, just getting the assistance that they needed.
Yeah, it sounds like you don't want finances to be one of those barriers that you mentioned, right?
Not finances, and also some victims, especially those from cultural communities where it is normal for them to have some distrust of law enforcement, that we wanted to be someplace where they could come first, and maybe help to make it a little less scary if law enforcement was an area that they wanted to go to, they just didn't know how to do it, or they were afraid to do it. So that's why I said at the beginning, it doesn't matter whether or not you reported the crime. And again, it doesn't matter when it happened either, because as we know, trauma hangs on. So for many people, it may have been a long, long time since the crime, but it is still being very, very apparent in their lives. And we just want to make life a little easier.
Okay. Okay. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the kinds of programs and services that crime victims can receive from iCAN?
Sure. We are a comprehensive victim service program. We provide services, everything from crisis intervention to information and referral services to counseling, therapy, and we have a specialized program where we assist victims through the parole hearing process. All of our services are free of charge, and we offer them in both English and Spanish.
Do you charge for any of your services, or is there a fee involved?
No, like I just said, they are absolutely free of
Oh, okay.
charge. When we created iCAN, one of the principles that was really important to us was that we truly believe that victims have been victimized enough, and the last thing they need to do is try to figure out how to pay for additional services.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted them to know, coming to our agency, that they don't even have to think about that. There is no fee, and we will never ask for any monetary any
Form of payment, right? Yeah, no, I
sorry.
understand. Yeah, there's no form of payment. All your services are free of charge, right?
That is exactly correct.
Perfect, perfect. And what about like maybe geographical limitations to your programs? Are there any sort of limitations geography-wise, or any other eligibility requirements?
Actually, there aren't.
Mm-hmm.
The only eligibility requirement is that you are a victim of violent crime.
Mm-hmm.
Um, our and as far as geographically, our very first client was in Maryland,
Oh, wow.
calling for advocacy for assistance with getting money that she was due through the Victim Compensation Fund back there.
Mm-hmm.
So we ideally will refer back to the individual's county and
Mm-hmm.
try to connect with them the services in their area,
Mm-hmm.
but we can help anyone anywhere, and no, we don't have any geographical limitations.
Okay, that's good to know. And so, if our audience wants to reach out and connect with iCAN, what's the best way to do that?
By picking up the phone and calling us
Mm-hmm.
or emailing us. And our telephone number is 916-273-3603, or you can email getinfo@ican-foundation.org.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And so, Chris, how do clients generally find your agency? Do they, is it sort of a word of mouth referral? Do you have an online presence?
A little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes we'll hear that we were found in a Google search.
Mm-hmm.
We work with many district attorneys' offices throughout the state of California, so they'll refer up to us. And other clients who have used us in the past will refer people that they have run into that they feel could benefit from our services as well.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk to you about some of the programs and services, maybe get into some of the details. So you mentioned that so iCAN can assist with preparing victims for court hearings. So I just wanted to get into a little bit like sort of what kind of court hearings, and then maybe if you could tell me a little bit about those services and how that works.
Okay, so this is really an area that is not our area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we refer back to victim witness programs throughout the state, because this is where they really excel. And we can assist victims with putting together impact statements, but outside of that, we will refer back to the district attorney's office. And if there was any challenge getting connected to who they needed to speak to there, we can help make that happen.
All right. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on sort of what the victim experience is when they attend some of these court hearings?
So there are varying types of court hearings everywhere, anything from the arraignment up into trial. And it's very stressful and scary to be in the same room with your perpetrator.
Sure.
Which is where the victim witness advocates are so necessary and so important in this process. And we love that we have collaborative working arrangements with many of them throughout the state, and can help connect victims so that they're not going through this alone.
And so I also understand that iCAN offers services relating to parole hearings. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that is absolutely one of our areas of expertise.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
We have a a, a dedicated program to assisting victims through the parole hearing process. And we help victims everywhere, and from beginning to end, getting registered with the Department of Corrections Victim Services if they hadn't already been, making sure that they are receiving their notices of parole hearings coming up. Again, that goes back to making sure that they have that 1707 on file. Very important. We will assist them with writing their statements. We will accompany them to court. To the parole hearing. We will go for them if it is too stressful for them and read their statements. And we're there primarily to be support for the victims, but we are also there making sure that their rights are upheld.
Okay.
Now, post hearing, if it is a denial of parole, then we have a master file that we watch. And when it's time for the next hearing to come up, it flags in our system. We'll give them a call to make sure that they've received their notice from the Department of Corrections, and then the whole process goes over again. If it's a grant of parole, then we assist them, if they're interested, in writing letters to the governor and helping to get their message to the governor, if they, whichever way they're feeling, whether they are supportive of this grant or if they're opposing the grant, making sure that their voice is heard in the process.
That makes sense. I want to just kind of go back to what you mentioned before. You talked about a 1707 needing to be on file. Could you tell us maybe a little bit more about what that is?
Absolutely. The 1707 form is actually a really important document that the Department of Corrections uses in order to obtain information on victims, victims' next of kin, additional family members, and witnesses, so that they can be in the Department of Corrections database. And so if an inmate dies, if an inmate is going to be released, or if they're eligible for parole hearings, the Department of Corrections or the Board of Parole Hearings has their information so that the victims can be contacted and notified of these events. Without that information, the departments cannot notify them.
Okay, so the 1707 is sort of it sort of allows the Department of Corrections to stay in touch with the victim.
Exactly.
Okay, so the victim, even though their name and information is on the initial sort of charging document and the initial conviction, they're not automatically informed of these of the process. Is that right?
That's right, because that information doesn't go up to the Department of Corrections. So it's up to the victim to provide that information to the department so that they know that this individual would like to be notified of any of the things that I had mentioned earlier.
I see. And so the 1707 form, is that something that victims can go online and find, and they would just simply submit that to the department?
That is correct. They can either go online and print it out, or they can file it online. There is an option to do that online, and they would want to go to cdcr.ca.gov. At that website, there will be a link to victim services, and that's where they'll find the 1707 form.
Okay. And so how do your services, how do they differ from what the CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, how do your services differ from their Office of Victim and Survivor Rights?
Good question. So the Department of Corrections, Office of Victim and and Survivor Rights and Services. The name is wonderful, but it's long, and I always get it.
A lot of letters in that acronym. Yeah.
So, first of all, they're a government agency. We are not. We are a private nonprofit. They are embedded in the system, so they have the knowledge about when hearings are coming up, where they can find where inmates are. They can give victims more information about what's happening with their particular inmate than we could. That's the Department of Corrections Victim Services job. They also will get victims signed up if they want to attend a parole hearing, making sure that they are on the list. Right now, everything's being done virtually, so making sure that they have the Skype link to be able to participate in the hearing, making sure that they're eligible to participate in the hearing, and giving them information about what to expect. The other thing that the Department of Corrections does is they are responsible for collecting restitution and paying restitution out from inmates that are serving time in the Department of Corrections. So that's a really big thing that they do. So they are constantly finding victims and making sure that they're getting the restitution that was ordered through the courts from the what the inmate is paying to the department. So we're different because, well, first of all, we don't do any of what I just said, except for preparing victims for parole hearings. So we're more, again, community-based. We can, when we go to the hearings with victims, we prepare them for the hearings. After the hearings, we can, provide the support and guidance to writing to the governor. And these are things that the Department of Corrections Victim Services does not do. And so, as I said earlier in our conversation, this is a need that we saw. So we're able to fill this gap in services and complement the phenomenal services that the Department of Corrections Office of Victim and Survivor Rights and Services are already providing, and just be able to build off that.
Well, I think that makes sense. I kind of want to get into what this experience is like for the crime victim. I mean, you mentioned that parole hearings is something that iCAN sort of specializes in. Can you maybe take us into the experience of the victim and talk a little about what that parole hearing process is like?
So before I started observing parole hearings, I had never quite understood what actually went into them and how much stress and anxiety and trauma these hearings can bring up for victims. This week alone, I think every day this week I've spoken to multiple victims who are preparing for hearings or have recently had hearings. It is let me just walk you through. About 90 days before the hearing, a victim will get their letter saying that a parole hearing is coming up. At that point in time, most victims will start feeling anxious, and that's when we start getting our calls. Oh my gosh, another parole hearing. It takes a lot of strength, a lot of tenacity, a lot of energy to get to these parole hearings and to be able to sit through several hours of questions back and forth between commissioners and the inmate, waiting for their turn to speak their piece, and knowing that, quite frankly, everything they have to say is really important in that hearing, and it absolutely is taken into consideration. But it doesn't mean that that inmate won't be, getting a grant of parole that day. And there isn't one victim I've worked with who isn't terrified that that's going to be the end result. So the days are long. They have to, except for now that we are doing everything virtually. Normally we'll travel to prisons anywhere throughout the state of California. Some victims are flying in from other states. Some come from other countries because it's that important that their voice is heard. They need to tell those commissioners, and they need that inmate to hear what this individual did to their lives, how the devastation, the destruction, and the pain has affected them every day. So it's probably, if not one of the most important things that they do in their life as far as honoring their loved one. And and saying those words, they're coming from, I'm hearing them in the back of my head. I was speaking to somebody this week who that's exactly what she said. This is one of the most important things that I do in my life, to honor my daughter, to make sure that this individual can stay incarcerated as long as possible. And those commissioners know how this has affected our lives.
So it's an opportunity for the crime victim to not only talk to the commissioner, but it sounds like it's also an opportunity for the victim to address the offender as well.
The offender gets to hear. They don't get to address the offender directly, but the offender sits there in the room and will hear every single thing that that victim has to say.
Okay. And in your experience, do you find that the commissioners will, that the victim's statements and their participation in the process has an impact on the commissioner's decision?
It has an impact. Let's put it that way. There's certain criteria commissioners have to follow, but I have seen information that was brought up in a victim's statement cause commissioners to go back and look further in a file and find information that was contrary to what the inmate was saying, and the end result was that inmate was going to get a grant of parole, but because the victim brought something up that they wanted to go and check, he was denied parole that day.
Interesting.
The victims being in the hearing room, victims making these statements, it is absolutely impactful on everybody in that room. It makes a huge, huge difference.
Sure. No, I can imagine it makes a difference on the process, and it's likely probably very empowering for the victim as well to sort of say their piece or sort of participate in the process. Is that your experience as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I do want to switch gears here, Krista, and talk a little about the emotional support piece of what iCAN offers to crime victims. Can you tell me more about the sort of counseling and therapy services that you offer?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking.
Sure.
We offer, like you said, counseling and therapy services, again, free of charge. And victims who come to our program for these services, it's unlimited. So we've had individuals come and have a few counseling sessions, and then I'm thinking of one in particular, moved out of the county, and 2 years later moved back into the county and said, this happened now, can I come back? Absolutely. The doors are open. She needed counseling, she gets more counseling. Of course, it's all related to being a victim of crime. So it's not just for, general issues, but they are, we've got good people doing this work, and I've seen some amazing transformations in the individuals who have come through our doors and received counseling, and been able to make some real significant changes and improvements in their lives as far as how they're being able to incorporate what has happened to them into their lives, and not have it overshadow them and be that dark cloud over them.
No, I think that makes sense. Now the counseling, the therapy, is this group counseling? Is this one-on-one therapy? Can you talk a little bit about the details?
Sure. So we do usually one-on-one counseling and therapy. However, our program is mobile, and our counselor and our therapist have gone out to other social service programs and started groups on other sites. So there are certain programs and certain individuals who may have barriers to accessing services. One of those barriers may be transportation. So our counselor and therapist as a team go out and do these groups, and a couple of locations here in Sacramento, they've been doing these groups for a couple years now. So they find where our services would benefit others. And again, that comes with collaboration with other organizations and making sure that we can provide our community members who have been victimized with as much support as possible.
Okay. No, I think that makes sense. Can you talk about the qualifications of the counselors and the therapy personnel?
Yes, because it's not just anybody who
Right,
does
right.
this. So our counselor has about 35 years experience in providing support for to trauma survivors. She works off a peer counseling basis, and so she is not a licensed therapist, but an options counselor. Um, uh, who has gone
Hmm.
through several hours of training, including the required training, the 40-hour peer counseling training
Hmm.
that is required through the state, but even so much more. Um, she's amazing,
Hmm.
and if and our therapist
Hmm.
is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Hmm.
And so she comes to us with, again, years of experience working with trauma survivors.
Hmm.
And she is also bilingual. So
Oh,
when we
interesting.
have individuals who come in that English is not their primary language or they
Hmm.
don't speak English at all,
Hmm.
she is able to work with them in their native language, which for many people, especially when you're in trauma, if English isn't your primary language, it's a lot easier to speak in your native tongue and be able to communicate that way. It's more comfortable for many.
Oh, absolutely. No, I can certainly understand that. So now when I hear sort of counseling versus therapy, I sort of think that they're related, but I don't actually maybe understand the difference. Could you talk about what a victim can
Mm-hmm.
expect when they go into maybe a counseling session and then contrast that to therapy or talk to a
Absolutely.
therapist? Yeah.
Absolutely. So, in our program, receiving counseling is, like I said earlier, more options based. So, a counselor will talk to an individual about their feelings,
Hmm.
let that individual talk to them about, whatever it is that's bothering them,
Hmm.
and it's more based on, well, therapy too is the same way, but more based
Hmm.
on listening.
Hmm.
The counselor then provides tools and support on how to address certain issues that they're experiencing in their
Hmm.
life. It is in the now.
Hmm.
They don't go back into childhood
Hmm.
or get to what's the core, what brought you here,
Hmm.
but more in the moment
Hmm.
and talking through, trying to find solutions, and again I'll use the word tools
Hmm.
on how to deal with what the crisis is now, what the trauma is now, um, versus therapy, where therapy is one done by ideally a licensed
Hmm.
individual who has the formal training, but also it goes deeper.
Hmm.
So with therapy, they are going to go a little bit deeper into
Okay.
what is causing this, let's go back further into where this all started, and try to get at the root of the problem. So it's more in depth, and I wouldn't say it's any easier,
Hmm.
because talking about your feelings and talking about what has happened to you many times is difficult.
Hmm.
But they're two different approaches, and one is peer based,
Hmm.
and the other is clinical based.
Got it. And when you say peer-based versus clinical-based, could you just maybe tell the audience sort of the differences between those two?
Of course. So peer based is like talking to a peer,
Okay.
just somebody who has more information, more knowledge, and maybe more experience, and can provide you tools on how to handle certain situations. And
Got it.
and the clinical aspect is that you've gone through years of training in school, and learned, and then of course sat
Hmm.
for licensure
Sure.
licensure.
No, I think that makes sense. Thank you for describing sort of the differences there. How frequently do you offer these services? Are these regularly offered?
So yes, every day,
Oh.
Monday through Friday. However, for our parole hearing support program, oftentimes we work over weekends,
Mm.
especially if somebody is preparing, for a hearing. They're going to want to talk as much as they can, work on their statement, and so sometimes that rolls into weekends. So most of the advocates at iCAN are pretty flexible with our time. So if someone needs us at any given time, usually we can find a way to make ourselves available.
Okay, no, thank you for that information. And so you've, over the last 30 minutes, you've really expanded on sort of your services and how you offer them to the community. Now with, the COVID-19 pandemic, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about maybe how your services and programs have been impacted by that.
Well, to start with,
Mhm.
it has impacted our ability to provide services in person.
Okay.
And I think that is the most devastating in that, this is a real personal issue that we deal with. And being able to sit down with somebody and see them face to face is important. But we've incorporated tools such as Skype, such as the telephone, and we're doing the best that we can with that as we, move through this. The other thing that the other way we've been impacted is that our requests for services have increased significantly, more than I could ever imagine.
Interesting.
So our little tiny agency, which was busy to begin with, is just going just helping like crazy. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
So the requests come in regularly. We're happy that we can help, but we are noticing that trauma plus isolation adds to anxiety and a need to for more help through certain instances. So we're helping a lot more.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, what about the way that the parole hearings? Now, I would imagine those are not done in person at the moment. Are those done through Zoom or Skype or some other method?
Yeah, they're done via video, so
Okay.
everyone's participating in by video. And I will say that although the victims that we've worked with are participating this way, it is not the way that they would prefer to be addressing the board or addressing, like the inmate. It's very impersonal, and it makes it a bit more complicated to get the message across. And so victims are feeling a lot more pressure on making sure that they get everything said that they need to, because when you're in a room with somebody, you can feel energy, you can read body language, you can it's much more personal. And taking that piece away is definitely, we're definitely seeing a difference there.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's not something I would have immediately thought of as being a challenge. Do you find that are there any other methods to perhaps allow the victim to get their message across, either by maybe writing a letter and submitting that, or is that just sort of how things are going to be until the pandemic ends?
Well, victims have always been allowed to write a letter and
Oh,
submit it. However, that is even more impersonal.
yeah,
So I
I can
think
imagine.
that when it comes to participating in the parole hearing process, and video has always been an option also, and so has calling in. But there are some victims prefer different ways of participating. But for those victim survivors that we work with, most of them want to be there in person. And like I said, it's I attend the monthly meetings for the parole board, and the last couple times I've just reminded them how detached we are through video, and that certain comments that they may make in front of people in a room where we're all sitting together and we can all read each other's body language, maybe taken one way, but where over video, it's taken a completely different way. So language matters, words matter, and to be, it's really important that we're all really careful on how we are presenting. But like I said, it's been quite a challenge for all of us.
Now that you've heard the show, please take a moment to rate and review it. And if you have any questions about any of the information you heard today, you can reach the Victims of Crime Resource Center at 1-800-842-8467. Or you can reach us online at 1-800-VICTIMS.org or Facebook at Victims of Crime Resource Center or Twitter at 1-800-VICTIMS. If you haven't had a chance, please take a look at some of the other episodes in our series. Thanks for listening.